Brexit?
Thank you, Chair. On February the 14th, MPs voted to reject the government's bad Brexit deal. Last week, MPs voted again to reject the very same bad Brexit deal. It's noteworthy that the Prime Minister thinks that MPs should get a second or even third say, but not the British public. Over and over again, government has failed to deliver promised breakthroughs from its hopeless Brexit negotiations. This deal would worsen life chances and reduce opportunities in London and across the UK for future generations. The Prime Minister needs to put our city and our country first and withdraw Article 50. It's time to give the public the final say on Brexit with the option of remaining in the EU. With our partners in the London Resilience Forum, I've taken the steps we can to ensure the capital is prepared in the event the UK leaves the European Union with no deal in place. However, the government's uncoordinated approach to the planning for a no deal has made this very difficult. For many businesses, it has almost been nigh on impossible for them to plan ahead. I'm helping business owners to access information and support that is available through the Brexit Business Resources Hub, and a new programme will launch shortly to help those who need face-to-face advice about navigating Brexit. For EU Londoners, especially the vulnerable and hardest to reach, I'm particularly concerned that the government is not doing enough to prepare them for the biggest change in rights and immigration status for a generation. I've developed an EU Londoners Hub to provide EU citizens and their families with the latest information about their rights post-Brexit and to direct them to expert legal advice and support services.
Thank you for that answer, which I think is a very important one. But would you agree that the problem actually is that 3 years after the referendum, it's still the case that no one knows where we're going to end up, leaving Londoners and London businesses in no place to prepare what may or may not be coming, with or without an extension which may or may not be granted? And in any event, Mrs May's rejected deal completely ignores the 80% of our exports, those in services, which aren't mentioned in it at all. We're still at a risk of a no-deal crash-out, aren't we, despite the parliamentary vote?
I think we are probably at the greatest risk we've been since June the 23rd of leaving the EU without any deal whatsoever. And that would be catastrophic for businesses, catastrophic for the NHS, catastrophic for construction, catastrophic for how Londoners feel in their future as well. And we've never been closer to that possibility than we are now, not just because of the proximity to March 29th, but because of the way the Prime Minister has handled negotiation. The idea that a Prime Minister who's failed to get the support of Parliament should make a speech at a lectern outside number 10 Downing Street, hectoring and lecturing MPs, almost calling them enemies of the people by implication, to try and get their support, I find astonishing.
Yeah, and with potentially only a week to go, due to the stubborn incompetence of the Prime Minister, who seems to be far more concerned about the future of the Conservative Party than of the country, she's still refusing to engage constructively with other parties and, as you say, slags off MPs instead. Even though the Speaker correctly says she can't bring back her failed plan for a third time, isn't it time to explore support for other options for a softer Brexit as proposed by Labour, or better still to go back to the country in the people's vote, a second referendum to break the impasse? And will you be joining me and others on the protest on Saturday?
Well, I think the best thing the Prime Minister can do is, bearing in mind we are sleepwalking towards exiting the EU without any deal whatsoever, is to stop the clock running. It is possible to stop the clock running by withdrawing, revoking Article 50. That stops it. The Prime Minister or her successor can then have a game plan in relation to what sort of relationship they want to have with the EU, negotiate with the EU, get a deal that we're happy with and doesn't damage our economy, businesses and our country, and then reserve Article 50. Another alternative is to get an extension or withdraw, and bearing in mind Parliament's in gridlock, to give the British public a say in relation to what we think the future should be. And I make this point. The Prime Minister is willing to go back to Parliament with the same deal again and again and again to give MPs another chance to change their mind, knowing what they know now, but scared to give the British public that same right and that same say. I can't think of anything more democratic than giving the British public a say on, do we accept the terms of exit she's negotiated with the option of remaining in the European Union? I'm not sure what she's scared of.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. And we've seen the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg with his Conservative ERG cronies, former Mayor Boris Johnson, who should know better but for his overweening personal ambition. The DUP, and no doubt the UKIP baggies will be speaking next, argue that the World Trade Organization rules are the panacea that allow free trade. However, they're being disingenuous, aren't they? Whilst we could implement zero tariffs on imports, it doesn't mean that other countries must do the same. So our exported goods will be more expensive overseas. Businesses could go bust. And as the World Trade Organization Article 24 only covers goods and not services, the restrictions 80% of our exports face are completely unknown. What does Article 24 of the WTO rules in the event of a no-deal Brexit mean for London's economy, which is so heavily service-based?
Can I just remind the Assembly members why this discussion is so important? One of the statutory responsibilities we have is to promote our economy. And Brexit is intrinsically linked with our economy. So if those Tories hectoring over there, they need to understand this issue is the most important issue the GLA has faced since we were formed in 2000. There is no part of London life not affected by this decision. That's why it's really important for you to be asking these really important questions. So those who want us to leave the EU without any deal whatsoever use the World Trade Organization as the reason, the fig leaf if you like, why things can be okay in the future. And you're right to ask about Article 24. Well, the first thing is WTO rules don't address the non-tariff barriers in relation to services that we trade in so much. You know, where we export services with a trade surplus in relation to services, 90% of London's economy is in the service sector and 90% of our country's economy is in the service sector. The deal negotiated by the Prime Minister doesn't address any of that. But WTO rules won't help us in relation to the non-tariff barriers in relation to services. But the idea that the European Union will give us zero tariff deals in relation to us leaving the EU without any deal whatsoever because of WTO is ridiculous, because it means they have to give the same terms, zero tariff, to the rest of the world. Why would they do that? But similarly, if we were to agree zero tariff deal with the EU, we'd have to do the same with the rest of the world as well. So it's nonsense when those Brexiteers say, don't worry about leaving the EU without any deal whatsoever, we can rely on the WTO. Nonsense.